Hello, good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to another edition of The Right Circle. Prabha Khaitan Foundation is committed towards various social and cultural literary activities in nearly 35 cities in India and abroad. The foundation has reconstructed the sessions to go virtual to enable word lovers to keep up their passion for literature and enrapturing conversations. The Right Circle is a platform that enables English authors and readers to network through an intimate and informal interaction. We are indeed very pleased to have with us the man of action, Mr. Neeraj Kumar. His action-packed career spans over 37 years, with 9 years dedicated to the CBI case. From 1976 IPS batch, he has held many a coveted designation in Delhi Police in several key assignments like DCP South, DCP Traffic, DCP Crime, and Joint CP Special Cell, eventually retiring as Commissioner of Police Delhi in 2013. He's the man behind the much talked about Nirbhaya rape case. It doesn't stop here. Mr. Kumar led the CBI investigations into serial bomb blasts of 1993 in Mumbai, and his team arrested over 20 absconders. He's credited with the arrest and deportation of American attacker Aftab Ansari from Dubai and the nabbing of Gujarat's underworld don Abdul Latif in Delhi. In conversation with him, we have Mr. Gopal Hasur, ex-IGP and ACP Bangalore. Welcome, sirs. Without much ado, I will leave you two cops to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Surekha, and my friend Anil and Anandita, and of course the foundation for giving me this great opportunity and a privilege to be talking to one of the most celebrated police officers of our times, Mr. Neeraj Kumar. Sir, good evening to you.
Good evening. Good evening, Sir.
Yeah, normally the word top cop or super cop is used to describe police officers. But I would not like to use those two words for Mr. Neeraj Kumar today, because this top cop and super cop words have been so much used and misused and abused. They have lost their relevance today. Somebody doing a one-off case suddenly becomes a super cop in the eyes of the media. But here is one person for 37 long years. Probably I can't recall of any other officer who has put in so much of effort in a national cause. And talking to him, conversing with him would be one of my greatest pleasures of my post-retired life. I wish I could have been in touch with you while in service, but geography divided us. I was deep down in the south. But nevertheless, I always kept hearing about you, reading about you, understanding your work, and the kind of efforts that you have been putting in for a national cause, of course. The glory followed thereafter, controversies followed thereafter, but that I'll reserve it for a little later. So it is a great opportunity, 37 long years, some of the most sensational cases in the history of India and Indian crime, especially in the last century. I would say some of the cases that you have handled, you have written about, to me, they really cause me a lot of thrill, excitement. But two caveats. I've just started with the two caveats. People in uniform, more so the police officers, are neither good writers nor good speakers. That is for obvious reasons. It is not that they are not capable, because 37 years, day and night, they live from one crisis to the other, chasing crime and criminals. Unlike other services or other creative people who sit on armchairs and imagine things, here the police officers are always on the move, living from one crisis to other, day and night. So it seldom gives them time. But I must say today, there are great honorable exceptions to this rule, to this caveat. And one such person is Mr. Neeraj Kumar, no doubt about it. The two books that he has written, I happened to read them. I had heard about some of these investigations through the media. The first book and the second book. Reading them actually made me to relive my own police life, and in a far greater way than what I have lived for 34 years of my service. Sir, it's a great pleasure to be conversing with you this evening, and me and you have some similarities. You also studied in a Sainik school at Tilaya in Bihar. I too studied in a Sainik school. And so my first question to be a little more personal. Being from a Sainik school from Bihar, the normal option for you should have been to join the defense services through the National Defense Academy. So getting into the police, was it by choice or by fate? To you, sir.
First of all, thank you, Mr. Hosur, for saying those very kind words about me. I'm aware that I'm in conversation with an outstanding police officer at the other end, a person who has been hit by terrorist bullets and the bullet of Virappan on 2 occasions. I'm aware that I'm speaking to somebody who has got 2 gallantry medals, which is a very rare phenomena. I'm also aware that I'm speaking to somebody who is extremely perceptive and who goes and I think we lost each other somewhere.
I think now we are back.
We are back. Okay. So
It is like losing a link in investigation for a while.
yeah, but we have got it back and we are very much on track. So the pleasure is equally mine. I also take the opportunity right at the outset to thank Prabha Khaitan Foundation, Anindita ji, Surekha ji, and all of you there for inviting me to a series of such functions spread across the length and breadth of the country. I'm really very, very grateful to you. Now, coming to your question, Mr. Hosur, it has been a series of accidents, shall I say, that led me to the police force. I was selected for the course beginning in July of 1969 in the NDA. I was selected for the Indian Air Force. But my father, he was very keen that I go to a university. And he said, well, all your life you have only been leading a regimented style of living. And you ought to go to a university, let the horizons of your mind widen, see the world, and then you make an option. If from this very young age, you have a tunnel vision, it will not do you much good. And I saw his point, even though I was a youngster, but I saw his point and decided to take his advice, much to the displeasure of my school principal and the school management, that I was not going, I was refusing to go to the National Defense Academy. This performance of a Sainik school is judged by the number of students who are sent to the National Defense Academy. So my principal took a very serious affront to this development. But nonetheless, there I was, not going to the NDA. Then I came to college and I never had any plan to, in fact, not only police, I never had any plan to, I did not know what exactly I wanted to do in life. And that is the truth. Throughout my 5 years in college, I just kind of flowed along. And then, like everyone else was appearing in the civil services, I also appeared and I got selected for the Indian Police Service. But I must say that it has been a great blessing. I have enjoyed every minute of my life in the Indian Police Service, and I cherish the time I have spent there. And as you have rightly said, that people spend tons of money to get the thrills of adventure and so on, and we are paid to get those experiences on a day-to-day basis. And it has been an extraordinary life, and it is thanks to the Indian Police Service, and also thanks to that advice that my father gave at the end of my school.
So I hope your advice is taken by your children today.
Oh yes, they have gone a step further. They have not even come to the civil services. They have taken the most unusual career options. My elder girl, she's a classical dancer, a full-time classical dancer based out of London. She does the Kuchipudi dance. And my younger daughter is a screenplay writer trained at the National Film Institute of India, FTII, and she's also a pianist who runs a piano academy, who also writes screenplays and is associated with the Mumbai film industry.
Great to hear the accidental choice that you had in life. But coming back to a little more serious note, in fact, when Anandita and Anil asked me that I should be conversing with you, I had my own doubts whether you'd approve of me to be in conversation with you. But thank you so much. You agreed, readily agreed. So that also forced me to take your two books in hand. And let me disclose to you something. I have never read a book in completely. And when I sat on the table reading that book from morning to evening, my wife was shocked. And I said, I have completed reading Dial D for Dawn with a great sense of achievement. And she applauded my effort. She said, first time I'm seeing you reading so seriously. I said, I am not reading seriously. The book is made me so serious that every page that I touch on, I feel like reading it, going ahead, going to the next page, next page, next page. The racy style that you as a professional police officer have written is something extraordinary, I must say. And it is written in such simple language. It is a very flowing language. And it makes the reader not to keep the book down. So I must congratulate you for that, for having made Gopal also read the book completely in one day.
Thank you so much.
So coming back to the book, the first book, Dial D for Dawn. You have written 11 stories, real life stories. And each one of those stories, which were real, has a direct impact on the territorial integrity, security, sovereignty of this nation. Those 11 stories, each one of them is unique. And I must say to all people in India who just watch movies on some of these issues in a very different context should read these books to understand what police officers have done, what they can do, what they are capable of. But coming back to Dial D for Dawn, out of the 11 chapters that you had, how did you think that the title of the book should be Dial D for Dawn?
Well, it was actually my editor's and my publisher's choice, because they wanted to name the book on the title of one of the 11 chapters, and they were very kind of taken up with this title, which is the title of one of the chapters in the book. They liked it very much, and they chose it, and it was not my choosing, to be very honest with you.
fiction writers, those people who write the thrills, because there is a similar play by name Dial M for Alfred Hitchcock's Murder. See, they have a lot of latitude. They have a lot of flexibility to bring in characters, take out characters, create a plot. Did you feel that since you are reporting the real life incidents for which you are the eyewitness, or the investigations of which you were holding the reins, did you at any point of time while writing these books feel constricted or restricted in bringing out the events?
Not even for a moment. And I do believe that truth is not only stranger than fiction. Truth is more riveting, more interesting, and more gripping than fiction is. And it was so easy just to reproduce what I had already experienced that I didn't have to imagine anything to, shall we say, make it any better, make it even, cushion it to make it more riveting. I said it as it was, and I'm so happy that you have liked it, and I'm so happy that my readers have liked it the way it was. And I can very proudly say that my subordinates and all my colleagues, nobody could ever find a single factual error or factual, distortions to suit the story. No, I have stuck to the truth, for whatever worth it was, and I'm so happy that it seems to have worked.
I think actually it reminds me of a very famous saying in Kannada, which I'll translate it into Kannada, into English. I don't have to remember anything because I always speak the truth.
Quite right.
I think it very rightly says that because in the introduction to the book written by Dr. Raja Vijay Karan, again a celebrated police officer of Delhi, he mentions that most of the material that is in your book is recounted from your memory, and you had not maintained any diary of any of these details. Maybe you must have referred here and there just to get the date or something right. But the innumerable number of names that you have written, especially of criminals and of your team members, right up to the constable and the head constable, I think that is something really appreciable. How could you manage to remember so many things? I know I initially told that you are telling the truth, so you don't have to remember things. Even if you are asked 10 times, you'll be saying the same thing. So can you just delineate on this?
I must say I'm blessed with a reasonably good memory, but even then it was not to that extent that I remembered all the details, the dates and the names and so on. So I did have to take the help of my colleagues who are still in service, and it required a bit of effort, but nonetheless it was fun because the idea of naming my colleagues was basically to give them the credit for the good work that was done. Police work, as you know, is a teamwork, and every member of the team contributes. And as a leader, what we have to do is to give the team a certain direction, a line of investigation, supervise the work. And whenever you are required to intervene yourself to make the going smooth, to make the investigation unhindered, you step in, you remove those blockades, and you let the investigation carry on. And also to keep encouraging your people and so on. So at the end of the day, it is a team which works. You are only there to give them your leadership, to give them your direction. And I have always felt that when the credit should go to the people who work in the field, and if there's anything that goes wrong, the blame should be taken by the leader. And this is the credo by which I have lived my entire life in the police.
uh, extending it a bit further, right through all the chapters, you have always linked organized crime to terror in most of the cases. So that means organized crime and terror are intertwined. Can you explain this with some examples from your writing?
See, terrorism is a kind of organized crime, I would say. Now, of course, terrorism is a crime against the state. Uh, but any act of terror people at the next lower level who are the organizers, who handle the logistics, who provide the material for the terror, they provide training and so on. So every activity is in a particular silo. So any terror group will have a group of people only giving training, another group of people who will be in charge of, say, if it is a trans-border terror plot, then to push people across the border. Another silo will be there to, provide them succor and support at this end. Another silo which will provide the logistics at the end where the terror activity has to take place. Much the same way organized crime functions. There is a leader, and then there are the next rung of people, then the next rung, and ultimately the foot soldiers. Often the foot soldiers don't know from where the directions are coming and what the ultimate objective is. They just do perform their role in the overall scheme of things. So, organized crime has the potential to become a terrorist group. And therefore, it is very important for all of us as police officers to nip organized crime in the bud. Because as the organized crime will flourish, the network will have the propensity to, grow into a kind of a setup that can be used by any terror group. So that is the link between organized crime and terrorism.
I think it's quite fascinating because one of the chapters in your book deals with kidnapping of the chairman and managing director of Khadim Shoes, Partho Burman, if I'm right, if I remember the name right. And the proceeds from this extortion, kidnapping and extortion, are used for 9/11.
Yes.
So this is a transnational nature of extortion that took place, and you have been a part of solving this great case and unearthing the money trail. Apart from that, I would like you to touch more on this case because it's very interesting reading. The genesis of the Indian Mujahideen at one point of at one place, you say that it is also linked to this case. But my understanding of Indian Mujahideen was that its genesis was in the Tiger camp of Mumbai. The two brothers who were from Karwar, they were a part of that Indian Mujahideen supported by the ISI. So can you explain this kidnapping case? And because that is very interesting.
Yes, indeed, it is very interesting. You are referring to the Bhatkal brothers.
Bhatkal brothers, Riyazuddin and
from Karavar, as you said, from near Mangalore. The story is like this, that Aftab Ansari, the main person behind the Khadim shoes owners kidnapping, was the person who was acting at the behest of the ISI. But to begin with, he was just a petty criminal. He was an extortionist, a kidnapper, and he was caught red-handed in Delhi, in Ashok Vihar, and he ended up in Tihar jail. And while he was in prison there, he came across some people who were highly indoctrinated and For instance, people like Omar Sheikh, there's another person from Mewat, and 3 or 4 radicalized Islamists. He came in contact with them and he himself got radicalized. So, kidnapper come extortionist becomes radicalized, and then he wants to do something for, Islam, so to say. And he ties up with certain 2 brothers, Asif and Arif Muhammad Khan, and he carries out this kidnapping. And one of the brothers got caught, and in fact, he was caught in this very case. And I had the opportunity to interview him, and he said that uh, he had heard that the Parliament House was going to be attacked in one of the training camps. Study by the Gujarat police in their case, and as it happened that there was an encounter, he tried to escape. That's what the Gujarat police says, and he was killed. It was perceived by everybody as almost everybody as a fake encounter, and his brother, he created Asif Ibrahim, Arif Muhammad Khan commando force, and that commando force carried out certain terror acts. And that commando force then linked up with the Bhatkal brothers. And that is how the Indian Mujahideen was created. And for far better than I do that they wreaked havoc all across the country. So it is so interesting, the point that you earlier made about organized crime becoming terrorist and organized groups becoming terror groups. This is a classic example that a petty criminal gets radicalized, creates organized crime group, which then becomes a terror group and wreaks havoc in the country. So this, I think, is a classic. And not only that, as you rightly pointed out, the money that was collected from one case of kidnapping was siphoned through Pakistan to the attack on the World Trade Center on 9/11.
Yeah, I think one more extremely interesting story that you have written, The Devil Wears the Khadi. I'm sure while investigating this sensational case, you must have trampled upon extremely sensitive people in Lutyens, Delhi. How could you manage this? Sometimes I wonder, handling this kind of the pulls and pressures, counter pressures, wheels within wheels. This must have been an extremely exhausting investigation.
Indeed, it was. At the same time, it was very rewarding, and it was most interesting. See, essentially, this was not within the remit of my team, this case. But since the information came to us, we followed it up at every stage. And we are so happy that we are able to get at Mr. Romesh Sharma, who is a member of the Dawood Ibrahim gang, a very active member of the gang, who is to work in Delhi wearing khadi. So in the garb of a politician, he was helping the underworld elements. Yes, you are right. He was connected to a large number of very well-reputed people, and also to the topmost business group of the country. And there were indeed lots of pulls and pressures. And it was because of those pulls and pressures, as I have written in the story, that when finally a certain business group, the Reliance Group, had to be raided in Bombay, they put so much of pressure on the director, the then director CBI, that I was taken off the case and it was given to another officer, and he bungled, and the information about the raid was leaked in the media and appeared on the front page of Asian Age, and that whole raid was aborted. So you are quite right. A number of very highly placed people in politics, in bureaucracy, in every walk of life, they came in within the ambit of this investigation. And there were a lot of pressures, but we just stuck to our guns. And there was no issue, except that a lot of people knew that if my team continued to work on this case, many skeletons will come out, tumbling out of the cupboard. So I was taken off the case.
How did you bear the political pressures during this time?
As I said, I just took it as they came. I mean, if they didn't want me to continue with a certain part of the investigation, I said fine. And the director later ruled his decision, because it was because of that he was embarrassed and he had to be removed. He was removed from his post because of the raid, which was leaked, details of which were leaked in the media. So I had no difficulty. I mean, we just did our job.
I think one of the finest cases that you have done, according to me, of course, all of them are extraordinary cases, is the famous lottery scam. I'll come to the IPL and cricket betting, which is the flavor of the season now. But the lottery scam, I think it is in your second book, if I'm right.
Yes.
Such a mammoth, gigantic scam. Probably nobody ever thought when they initially started that this would be I would say, the biggest financial fraud that has taken place on the most common people. Most financial frauds take place on people in higher places. But this was affecting the smallest man in every village. I think that, to me, I rate it as one of the extraordinary cases because it was pan-India. It spread across from north to south, east to west, and so many multiple challenges that you had. Ultimately, the matter had to go up to Supreme Court. And Supreme Court then ruled, banned all private lotteries in the country. I think I must credit you this extraordinary piece of work, which has defined the lottery system to a great extent in this country, where people, maybe they are running surreptitiously, but I think one full stop was given then. Can you say something about this?
Yes, indeed, it has been a very satisfying case. And as you have rightly said, it had sweeping impact on the country. And to say that the work that we put in, the effort that we made, led to the banning of the lotteries, which was a great social ill that was prevailing, turning millions of people into paupers. A number of people committed suicide. Terrorism started, extremism started in the Northeast because of the lottery frauds. And all kinds of things were happening. And it was happening under the noses of the topmost people. The people who were supposed to control the lotteries were the people who were actually abetting all the malpractices that were there in this trade. And so it was a very satisfying piece of work, just because we followed up on a small piece of information which came in the form of a complaint from somebody who was aggrieved at the hands of the lottery operators. And so we followed it up to its logical conclusion, and we realized that it was a big racket that was going on. And I'm so happy that we were able to eventually win the case in the Supreme Court and get this thing banned. And ever since then, private lotteries have continued to remain banned in the country.
Neeraj sir, I think my time on this show seems to be coming to an end because I have been given only just 30 minutes. I can keep on speaking to you for an hour or more easily. But before I say, before the audiences come in with wonderful questions that you will have to answer, how do you handle Sushant Singh Rajput, Riyaz Chakrabarti, Kangana cases, which are so much, they have received so much of publicity. The media has been hounding each and every one connected with that. It's a hypothetical question. How would you have differently handled the situation?
I would have had better communication channels with the media and through the media with the people. I think the Mumbai police, the only place where they went wrong was they bottled up immediately, they clamped up soon after the incident, and they stopped sharing information and stopped resolving the various doubts and various questions that were coming in the minds of people. And if they had been in communication with the media, in communication with the people, and tried to assuage their feelings and try to answer their questions on a day-to-day basis, uh, the Mumbai police would not have received so much of flack. And but certain things were absolutely unpardonable. For instance, the way they handled the Bihar team which came, that was something which is just can't be overlooked, because after all they were also officers in uniform. They may have registered a case wrongly, but yet the fact of the matter is they were brother officers, and one of them was an IPS officer. He came to Mumbai to not extend basic courtesies locally, to put him in quarantine and all that was a mockery of the camaraderie that we profess or we talk about from the rooftops. It was a very, very poor example of the lack of camaraderie. And so it was all in all a very badly handled case. If I was in charge, I would have been in regular touch with the media and through the media with the people, put all their doubts at rest, and I would have allowed the investigation to happen, told them that, well, we will come to a conclusion at the end of our investigation, rather than telling them the very first day that it is, suicide or it is homicide or whatever. We should have allowed some time to ourselves to come to a conclusion. So yeah, that's how I would have done it.
You are the police commissioner of Delhi. I think one of the most difficult jobs for any police officer in India. Much more difficult than being in any other complicated place. Maybe across the world, I don't know. You handled the Nirbhaya case. You went through a lot of flack, turmoil, but yet you came out extremely successful. In fact, the Nirbhaya case is a milestone in police work, and that has set into motion a huge number of changes connected with such serious rape cases. Having had that great experience of handling it with so much of pull, pressure, counter pressure, criticism, so on and so forth, what do you think of this recent Hathras case of UP?
That is something for which we as police officers should hang our heads in shame collectively. It has been very badly handled. There is no reason why, on the very first instance, when the girl went to the police station with her mother or with her family members, why her case was not registered, why she was not taken to the hospital immediately, why the best of medical facilities was not made available to her, and how do you justify the manner in which she was cremated. I mean, after she passed away, can anybody justify the way she was cremated? So it was a series of not only goof ups, but a series of, I should say, suicidal steps taken by the UP police. And I've always said that the biggest reform that our police needs is the confidence that if you register a case and if your crime figures go up, you will not be held responsible. Unfortunately, despite so many years, so many instructions, police commissions, and so on, this basic step of a man coming to a police station and the case being registered immediately, or his complaint is recorded immediately, and suitable follow-up action taken, this has not happened. It doesn't cost anybody a single penny to do this work. But why the police does not do it is because, as you know, his or the police station's performance or the district's performance is gauged by the crime figures. And crime figures are the easiest thing to manipulate. Easiest thing. Either don't register the crime, or if you register, do it under a milder section of law. And that is what leads to all the problems. If the very first step you have done wrongly, then obviously whatever will follow will be incorrect. And this is precisely what has happened in the case of the Hathras case. If they had just done this basic step of registering the case, or at least recording the complaint and doing what was required to be done, they would not have ended up in this situation.
I think I will come to a little more personal level, if you don't mind.
Please.
I know you enjoy golf.
Yes.
Once in a way, you have single malt. The single malt that you had in a club in London when you went after the match fixing was investigated. More important than that, I am told by some of your very dear friends, your batchmates, that you are a movie buff and love ghazal. Which is the last movie that you saw?
Well, ever since the lockdown, I have not seen any movie in the auditorium, but I must have seen it on the OTT. Yeah, I saw a very nice one in which Tom Hanks is acting. It's called A Pleasant Day in the Neighborhood. It is a movie which is on Amazon Prime, but very, very nice with Tom Hanks. A very simple story. It's called A Pleasant Day in the Neighborhood. Yeah. So that was the last one, and I really enjoyed it.
Now that it is the time for Sundowner, can you come out with one of your favorite ghazals?
Ghazals? Oh no, I can't sing. I can't sing to save my life. But I'm very fond of ghazals. I'm very fond of Begum Akhtar, very fond of Jagjit Singh also. Mr. Vinod Sehgal is a personal friend of mine. The man who sang "Hain aur bhi duniya mein sukhanwar bahut achhe, कहते हैं कि गालिब का है अंदाज़े बयां और." And he's also sung some ghazals by Jigar Muradabadi. शायर फितरत हूँ मैं, फिक्र फरमाता हूँ मैं, रूह बनकर जर्रे जर्रे में समा जाता हूँ मैं, आके तुझ बिन है दोस्त घबराता हूँ मैं, and so on. So it is, I'm very fond of ghazals, but I'm sorry I can't sing. I won't like to make a fool of myself by singing now.
I know you have a lot of zest for life, lively person to talk to, because I spoke to you for the first time yesterday just to understand you, and I found you to be an extremely lively person to speak to. What makes you to remain so lively and physically fit? What do you do? What is your regimen?
Being lively, I think it comes naturally. I've been like that all the time. I like to enjoy the finer things of life, like music, like movies and theater and so on, and reading, a bit of writing. So this has always been the topmost on my agenda. And yes, I do take care of my health because unfortunately I've inherited some ailments, so I have to keep fit, uh, make an extra effort to do exercise and so on. So to keep healthy.
And
That's what I call it.
and which is the next book in the pipeline?
Well, I'm trying to write a book on cricket because I spent 3 years in the BCCI, leading their anti-corruption and security unit. So I want to recollect my experience in the BCCI and also talk about what I saw of the corruption in cricket, not only in the playing of cricket, but also in the management of cricket. So that is what I'm trying. But let's see how it goes.
Okay, wishing you all the best. And I thank Anandita, Anil, and Surekha and the Prabha Khaitan Foundation for this wonderful opportunity to interact with a great police officer. And I'll continue. I'll wait for your new book. I hope it will come soon. And a lot of people should read his books just to the thrill of whatever thrill that we get in watching a movie or pay money for it. Just buy a book; it will absorb you right through the day. Wish you all the best, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. A pleasure talking to you, Mr. Hosur. Real pleasure.
Thank you, sir. So we have a question from the audience. Mr. Praveen Venkatgiri asks you, how does one manage to leave pressures of work out before entering home? How does one deal with so much negativity shown by public towards one's profession?
It's very difficult. Must say that it is very difficult because you are so preoccupied, especially if you are a person who is very involved in your work. You do carry those pressures home. But then you have to train yourself to switch off. Otherwise, you can end up getting insane. If you take the pressures too much, it will not help you in any way. In fact, it will affect your work, it will affect your health, and it will definitely affect your family life. But it comes to you naturally. It should come to you naturally. You do not need to take steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to do that. It comes naturally to you to balance work and home.
Thank you, sir. So we thought we will end this evening with listening to your ghazal, but yeah, it was an honor and a privilege for all of us to have witnessed this interesting conversation. On behalf of Prabha Khaitan Foundation and Ehsaas Women of Bangalore, I would like to thank you, Mr. Kumar and Mr. Hosur, for such an engaging conversation. We would also like to thank our hospitality partner, Taj West End, and also not last but the least, a big thank you to all the guests whose never-ending support has given us strength to reformat the sessions to go virtual. Thank you so much, sir, and hope to see you in Bangalore sometime when things open up. A request to all our audience, if you could send us your name and address to the number 741287133, we would send you a signed books of Mr. Neeraj Kumar. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Surekha ji.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.